Well, I for one did not want that to end. Let us hope that we can maintain this happy energy throughout the next 2.5 days. Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Haida Hackman. I am the Secretary General of the International Social Science Council, the ISSC, and it is my great privilege and pleasure today to welcome all of you to Bergen and to this, the first ever World Social Science Forum. The decision to regularly convene a World Forum of social science scholars, researchers, and stakeholders was taken in November 2006 as part of a wider resolve of the ISSC membership to reform and renew the Council. This event, then, is a key delivery moment for us, and we are very proud to be able to share it with you and to use the next 2.5 days to introduce you to the new ISSC. I want to take a moment to briefly introduce to you the ISSC's current Executive Committee, a committed group of individuals who oversee the Council's work in between our General Assembly meetings and who have provided crucial guidance and support in the work leading up to this event. I will ask them just to stand as I mention their names. So in alphabetical order, they are Glenn Davies, Director for International Affairs at the UK's Economic and Social Research Council, Barbara Goebel, Director of the Ibero-American Institute in Berlin, Germany, Katsuya Kodama, our Vice President for Finances and Director of the Community Development Initiative Research Center at Mi University in Japan. Alberto Martinelli, Professor of Political Science and Sociology at the University of Milan and former President of the International Sociological Association. Adebayo Olukoshi, Professor of International Economic Relations and immediate past Executive Secretary of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa. Michel Sabourin, Professor of Psychology at the University of Montreal, Canada, Treasurer and Executive Committee Member of the International Union of Psychological Science. Lourdes Sola, Professor of Political Science at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and President of the International Political Science Association. David Thorns, our Vice President for Information and Communications, Professor of Sociology and Director of the Social Science Research Centre at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And Luc van Langehoven, Director of the Comparative Regional Integration Studies Programme of the United Nations University. Luc is our Vice President for Scientific Activities. There are 3 additional people who have served on our executive committee during the lead up to this event, and one of them is in the audience, which we're delighted about. Let me mention them to you as well. They are Attilio Boron, Director of the Latin American Program of Distance Education in the Social Sciences and Chair of the ISSC's Comparative Research Program on Poverty, Huang Ping, Director General of the Institute of American Studies of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Olive Shisana, President and CEO of South Africa's Human Sciences Research Council. Except for Attilio and Olive, who unfortunately could not be here today, all the executive committee members are here, and I sincerely hope that you have an opportunity in the coming days to meet with them and through them to learn more about the Council, its work, and its ambitions for the future. In the last 2 years, in the build-up to the forum, the ISSC has had what you might call a satellite office right here in Bergen. In many ways, and for purposes of this particular event, Bergen has been our headquarters. Here with us on stage, representing the Bergen team, is Anneliese Fimreiter. Anneliese is a professor in the Department of Administration and Organization Theory here at the university and senior researcher in the Stein-Rocken Center for Social Studies. She has chaired the forum's local organizing committee, comprising a dedicated team of creative colleagues whose names you will find listed in your programs. We owe the Bergen team our great thanks for their invaluable contribution to making this forum happen. The other people on stage with us today are special guests and speakers. They include Minister Tura Olsland, Arvid Hallén, Sigmund Gronmo, Pierre Sonnet, Helga Nowotny, and Gudmund Hernes. I will introduce each one in more detail just before they take the floor. Let me start then with the person who has brought the ISSC and Bergen together, who has brought vision and inspiration to both teams, and without whom we would not be here today. This is Gudmund Hernes, the ISSC's president since November 2006. Gudmund is a sociologist who has held professorships here at the University of Bergen, as well as at the University of Oslo, and visiting fellow and professorships at Stanford and Harvard. Alongside his distinguished academic career, he has served in Norway as Undersecretary of Planning, Minister of Education and Research and Ecclesiastic Affairs, Minister of Health. He has directed UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning and served as UNESCO's coordinator for HIV/AIDS. Today, Gudmund is based at the Fafo Institute for Applied Social Research in Oslo, although I think it is fair to say that we see him as regularly in Paris as his colleagues do in Oslo. It is a privilege to work with Gudmund, and I am thrilled to invite him to set the scene, set the theme for this conference, share with us his vision for this first World Social Science Forum and the fora that will follow it. Before I give the floor to Gudmund, may I now ask all of you to switch off your mobile phones. Ladies and gentlemen, Gudmund Hernes.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Just by the 8 titulary words I just uttered, we are in the thicket of social science. Ministers brings to our minds political authority systems and the masters who fund us. Excellencies refer to ambassadors from nation states and to heads of international organizations that we are embedded in. Colleagues hints to the professional networks of knowledge that we exchange and engage in. Friends recalls shared experiences and informal bonds cutting across national boundaries and academic status systems. Ladies and gentlemen, well, you all know that. And of course, addressing you this way is also a way of confirming by ritual a common endeavor. Indeed, the very language we use and how we use it condense the social structures in which we are rooted and the social processes in which we engage. So why are we here at this first Social Science Forum? A first answer could be, we are here to celebrate. For never before have there been so many social scientists in the world. Let me illustrate by just 2 comparisons. There are now many more social scientists in the world than the whole population of Margaret Mead's Samoa, 200,000. There are more economists in America than there are polar bears in the Arctic. And in spite of the economic crisis, it is the bears that are the endangered species. The number of social science students is increasing by the year, as is the proportion of the student body. Never before have the social sciences been so influential. Economists run the ministries of finance, political scientists staff public administration and local governments, MBAs crowd the boardrooms. Indeed, social scientists are deeply implanted in public as well as private organizations nationally and globally. Never before have social scientists had such an impact on public opinion, both in terms of how the world is seen and also on the way it is acted upon. Indeed, what used to be specialized terms like cross-pressure, self-fulfilling prophecy, comparative advantage, free rider, or separation anxiety has entered everyday language. There are more graphs and maps in daily newspapers today than there were in professional journals a few decades ago. And after Kinsey, social scientists have entered not just boardrooms, but also bedrooms. So, social scientists were never so many, and the social sciences were never as influential as now, whether the issue is education or epidemiology, macroeconomic management or trend analysis, psychiatric treatment or market innovations. Social science informs us about what goes on and what needs to be done. Is this all to the good? That is definitely open for debate. The influence of the social sciences has been a mixed blessing. Last October, Alan Greenspan conceded that his free market conception of shunning regulations was deficient. Yes, I found a flaw, he said in the congressional hearing. That is precisely the reason I was shocked, because I had been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceedingly well. Another example, in Malawi, the World Bank has now taken self-criticism for pushing private markets, opposing government regulation, and fertilizer subsidies, all aimed to promote cash crops for exports, a policy resulting in food shortage. Perhaps we also will see some self-criticism from the social scientists that provided the intellectual rationale for Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. And part of the diagnosis of the present economic crisis is that social scientists were instrumental in constructing or misconstructing both the toxic financial instruments and flawed institutions. In short, it is not good when the social science models of the world are misconstrued. It is even worse when their models for the world leads to misconstruction of the world itself. So the social sciences is often partial, as when economic analysis of markets is carried out without including the institutions that are crucial for their functioning. Social science is sometimes deficient, as when transactions are addressed, neglecting the broader social contract, ethical obligations, and legal liabilities. Yet, the demand for more social science and better social science is likely to increase. This comes from the state of the world, more specifically, what could be called a confluence of crises. The climate is worsening, and it is in large part due to human activities, and the consequences for humans will be dire. Epidemics can spread faster than at any time before in human history. Indeed, only 10 days ago, we were worried that we would have to call off the World Social Science Forum due to a global pandemic. We are lucky that we are here and can run the session on pandemics we planned more than a year ago. Economically, we are in the worst global crisis since the 1930s, and these crises prove that the planet is one, indeed, and is also one commons. It is shrinking and it is stressed, since the crises mutually reinforce each other and also highlight other menacing developments. The planet is getting more crowded. 3 billion people will be added to the global population over the next 40 years. The world's population is not just growing, it is also graying, with dependency ratios increasing on all continents. The number of poor is again increasing. Food is becoming precarious for more millions. The first Millennium Development Goal of eradicating extreme poverty and hunger by 2015 is becoming more unattainable. Water resources are becoming scarcer. Hundreds of millions have inadequate access to safe drinking water. Hundreds of millions more inadequate access to water for sanitation and waste disposal. The crisis affects most adversely those worst off from before. The net outcome is that conflicts, old and new, can increase and intensify. They are exacerbated by several factors. One is that the peoples of the world are more tightly coupled, in the sense that impacts from one country spread wider, faster, and stronger than at any time in human history. We learned from the present economic crisis that the Asian economies were not decoupled from the American or European economies, or vice versa. Rather, impacts cascaded and ricocheted around the world in less than 80 days. We have learned from AIDS and SARS that no country is an island to itself and that viruses travel without passports. What happens to any country is more and more decided from abroad. The fact that we are now on one planet also means that there are no safe havens. We cannot close the city gates or pull up the drawbridge to prevent the impacts, whether they come from close neighbors or from faraway foreigners. Indeed, in an integrated world, it is becoming as self-defeating to beggar thy distant foreigner as to beggar thy neighbor. Hence, concerted and collective action becomes more necessary, indeed imperative. Yet, confronted by the need for concerted action to shape our collective future, we are very much prisoners of the past. The world is still organized primarily according to the doctrines of the Peace of Westphalia as nation-states. And what we call the United Nations, in fact, often operate as disunited agencies. Moreover, in many countries, the inherited state boundaries do not coincide with ethnic, religious, or national loyalties. Countries that used to be homogeneous are becoming more multi-ethnic and multi-religious. I now meet more people from distant places crossing the street in Bergen than I did during my whole youth, also creating a new pleasant diversity. There were no Chinese or Indian restaurants in Norway then. In addition to the pleasures and challenges of multiculturalism, there is also the phenomenon that we could call multichronism, societies with cultural elements from different epochs coexisting in the same place. Globalization not only promotes multicultural societies, but also multichronic societies. The skyscraper next to the cathedral, the primitive mixing with the postmodern, contemporary aspirations with feudal traditions. Globalization functions like a time machine, which aggravates collisions between the past and the future. With vivid pictures communicated both ways, some become fearful of a future that is beamed on the screen in their home, whereas others are fearful of a living past that is moving in next door. All happens in the present, in real time. Hence, some experience future shock, while others experience olden shock. The global village, indeed almost all villages, is getting populated by people not only from different places, but also teleported, so to speak, from different centuries. If what I have described are important aspects about the state of the world, what is then the state of the art, our art? The social sciences themselves, to a great extent, grew out of the Enlightenment, when new ideas about religion, reason, man, and society were merged into a fairly coherent worldview, stressing human rights, individualism, and constitutionalism. Studies of alien societies were often used as a contrast in analyzing a country's own institutions and customs. A range of new fundamental concepts were articulated about the autonomy of the individual and inviolable rights, about individual freedom and the sovereignty of the people, about the tripartition of state power and the independence of the state from religious supremacy, about the unfairness of inherited privileges, and about principles for organizing a market economy. Equally fundamental was the recognition that a plurality of opinions in an open, critical debate was necessary to gain new insights and for citizens to forge their own history. Education for all, including women, was articulated as a political goal, and a free press and the dissemination of knowledge were seen as means for enlightenment and personal development. Power, it was argued, could only be legitimate when it promoted the welfare of the people. The development of social theory has been accelerated in periods of rapid social change. For example, the Industrial Revolution was accompanied by an intellectual revolution, a fundamental change in the thinking about how the economy works and what should be the guiding principles for economic policy. A key part of the story became the divergence between, on the one hand, the increase in output and wealth of nations, and on the other, the effects of competitions on the condition of the workers, that is, the impacts of unfettered capitalism on the misery of laborers, including women and children. This is the story about industrial production, always in flux and forever changing, driven by innovation, free trade, and competition, resulting not just in expanding welfare and the swelling of consumer goods, but also in constantly changing industrial relations in the location of industries, in the opportunities for employment, and in the conditions of work. This story about the changing interrelationship between industrial production and social conditions is not history. It is a story unfolding now under the name of globalization, the ever more unfettered flows of goods and monies and peoples and ideas. These themes are old, yet they are topical. They have been addressed and analyzed for 2 centuries, yet they are timely and pertinent. They concern all the social sciences, since what are changing are not just national economies, but also ethnic boundaries, institutional arrangement, cultural habits, and individual mindsets. Indeed, getting back to the point of the whole globe becoming a commons with the risk of a tragedy of commons also at the global level, a critical issue is the mismatch between, on the one hand, the scope and consequences of technological and economic integration, and on the other hand, the range of political institutions to cope with them. That is, the mismatch between globalization and governance as highlighted by the present economic crisis. Few saw it coming. The question is whether we did not see it coming because we used the wrong glasses, not good enough theories, or simply because we never started looking, even after the first whistles were blown. There is also considerable professional disagreement on what is to be done. What are effective remedies, and what are their impacts on what will happen in the near and distant future? On many of these crucial issues, social scientists clash. Hence, in many ways, the social sciences themselves are fragmented. Indeed, some argue that the disciplines are in disorder, that there is not one social science, but many. Rather than one paradigm, there are competing schools. If there is one planet with worlds apart, there is also the problem of the social sciences not being on the same map. Several attempts at grand theory have been challenged or have disintegrated. Marxism had such a claim, structural functionalism also. One has been made by sociobiology, another by the neoclassical synthesis. Should we retain this ambition? Is there one social science or many? Should we have a universal aspiration? Should we strive for what physicists called a theory of everything? Can there be a single encompassing theory of all human behavior? And what is our situation now? What do we start with? First of all, we have no single generally accepted model of man. We can draw on a wide set of such models, ranging from Freudian theory to what has been called administrative man, and increasingly the less calculating, less predictable, and partly irrational relatives of rational man. As the fate in simple rational actor models has been shattered, a series of half-breeds, so to speak, have been developed, a whole bestiary of model actors with engaging stories about the properties they are supposed to embody. Some of the most interesting ones have been developed in cognitive psychology and behavioral economics, and therefore, there are new couplings also being made between old disciplines. And what is the relationship between simple rational actor models of man and complex human identities? Amartya Sen has advised us to set aside a one-dimensional approach to identity, which results in the civilizational and religious partitioning of the world, and to adopt a multiplex conception. Is such a conception more appropriate in modern societies which function as a mixing vessel for the reassortment of partial identities from different cultures and epochs? Not only have the social sciences produced a wide range of humanoids, that is, theoretical constructs which are our lookalikes, there is also at our disposal a wide range of mechanisms spanning from self-fulfilling prophecies to prisoner's dilemmas, from Cobwell models to selection models, all useful to interpret and explicate different actual situations or events. Should our goal be to identify such mechanisms, explicate their logic, and then use them to explain why different social phenomena unfold as they do? Should our goal, as Robert Burton had it, be theories of the middle range rather than grand theory, or, as James S. Coleman argued, sometimes through theories, useful for interpreting and illuminating different specific phenomena, rather than striving for a theory of everything? Or put differently, is waiting for the great synthesizer a bit like waiting for Godot, expectantly but unsuccessfully for a synthesis that we might not even acknowledge, much less appreciate if it turned up? Rather than striving to connect the dots, should we search for more dots, only some of which may be connected? If so, should the key part of the agenda of the social sciences be to rediscover each other, to break out of the disciplinary and the myopic? More than that, is a moral to be drawn that we have to engage with both the natural sciences and the humanities as a contact sport, so to speak. Personally, I would advocate not so much interdisciplinary research as integrated research, that is, research that in its very design, execution, application, and presentation brings together the humanities, the natural sciences, and the social sciences in joint projects. Climate change, which we are going to address at this conference, or managing disasters, which is another topic here, provide examples of topics which can require such integrated research. Climate change is the unfolding of the forces of nature, but they have been triggered by human action. We cannot change the way the forces of nature work, but we can change the way humans act. This is why social science is so critical for the destiny of our planet afflicted by climate change, in identifying its social causes and mapping its human impacts, in calculating cost and in advising policies. Social science must help measure, assess, negotiate, and organize, and of course also help preserve human diversity and culture. The message of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is that the planet itself may be imperiled, that is, that the forces that have been unleashed through energy use and pollution, if not addressed immediately, intelligently, and forcefully, may cause irreversible damage to our common global environment. When I say immediately, intelligently, and forcefully, I'm no longer talking about natural phenomena, but about human responses, about social science knowledge, and about evidence-based policymaking. More than that, it is a plea for integrated research where the humanities, the natural and the social sciences jointly address natural phenomena, social processes, institutional design, cultural interpretation, ethical norms, and mindsets. The overall message to the first World Social Forum would then be this: we have to simultaneously address the state of the world and the state of the art, the course of events, and our capacity to analyze and cope with them. In order to make social science relevant, pertinent, and potent, we as social scientists therefore have to scrutinize our own concepts about how society works and also engage in vigorous self-examination about how our approach is fair in order to define common tasks and set a shared agenda. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic? Our time is one of great contrast. We have rapid technological advance, and peoples and individuals every day are better connected and have expanding opportunities to learn. But we also have the widening gaps between the rich and the poor, the food crisis and the water crisis. There is the advancing science and understanding, but also increasing impacts of fundamentalism and intolerance. There is the sanguinity that men make their own history. Yes, we can, but also skepticism about whether we have workable solutions to the crisis that confront us. There is the advance in critical inquiry, knowledge and education, but also the broad appeal of different types of dogmas and doctrines, for example, intelligent design. Even in his bicentennial, Darwin is yet on trial. There is the aspiration that what is most important can be had, and what is, for example, embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or in the Millennium Development Goals. Yet there is also the trepidation of failure, or even worse, that we, like the sorcerer's apprentice, have unleashed forces that we cannot control. There is the dream that we can redeem for all peoples the universal desire for liberty, equality, community, and make up for opportunities lost. Yet there is also the alarm that we may have passed the point of no return in climate and that we are sliding back to a terrifying state where even the control of nuclear weapons may be lost. The theme for the World Social Science Forum, One Planet, Worlds Apart, I have tried to summarize what we need to address and will address over the next 2.5 days. My personal view is first that our professional shortcomings are the basis for optimism. There is so much that can be done. As Robert Bork had it, the only cure for bad theory is better theory. Secondly, the confluence of crisis provides the opportunities, the challenges, what needs to be done. We have been brought face to face with the world we have made, what we must confront and cannot sidestep. So let me rephrase what I just said by quoting what a great social observer and a sharp social critic said 150 years ago in 1859. For I cannot put it better than the opening lines of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. There is the point of departure. Let's open the World Social Science Forum. Welcome to join in developing a social science that is humanistic in its approach, logical in its construction, informative for empirical analysis, and deeply human in its leading themes, and which can help unbind the creative potential that is underused in most and alienated in many. Hence the broader agenda to help make institutions that can develop the whole range of human identities, because the richness in each of our lives emanates from all others developing the full richness embodied in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gudmund. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have with us today Minister Tora Aasland, Norway's Minister of Higher Education and Research since 2007. Minister Aasland trained as a sociologist at the University of Oslo and has worked as a researcher and manager at the Institute of Social Research in Oslo. She has been a member of parliament, held numerous key public positions at local, national, and regional levels, and has performed a great number of elected and appointed tasks in the areas of governance, education, and culture. Minister Aasland, thank you very much for your most generous support for this World Social Science Forum, which we hope will live up to your expectations. We are delighted that you agreed to be here for the opening ceremony, and I am honored to invite you now to address us.
Thank you so much, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great pleasure and a great honor for me as Norwegian Minister of Research and Higher Education to wish you all participants of this first World Social Science Forum welcome to Norway. It gives me even added pleasure to meet you, being a sociologist by background and a former researcher. I feel I am among colleagues. Hence, I'm not here just for the opening. I'm also here to take part in some of the sessions and to listen and to learn. We count ourselves fortunate to have in this conference 2 Nobel laureates. And as a reflection upon science and the conference theme, One Planet, Worlds Apart, I would like to begin with the words of another Nobel laureate, the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, from her poem Maybe all this. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1996, and the poems go like this. Maybe all this is happening in some lab, under one lamp by day, and billions by night. Maybe we're experimental generations, poured from one vial to the next, shaken in test tubes, not scrutinized by eyes alone, each of us separately plucked by tweezers in the end. Or maybe it's more like this: no interference, the changes occur on their own, according to plan. The graph's needle slowly etches in predictable zigzags. Maybe thus far we aren't of much interest. The control monitors aren't usually plugged in, only for wars, preferably large ones. For the odd ascent above our clump of earth, for major migrations from point A to B. Maybe just the opposite. They got a taste for trivia up there. Look, on the big screen, a little girl is sewing a button on her sleeve. The radar shrieks and the staff comes at a run. What a darling little being with its tiny heart beating inside it. How sweet its solemn threading of the needle. Someone cries enraptured, "Get the boss." Tell him he's got to see this for himself. So far, dear friends, the words of Szymborska. It is stated at the conference site that the importance of social science has been heightened in proportion to the effects of human actions on global conditions, notably with respect to climate change. This makes me pleased to tell you that 2 weeks ago, the Norwegian government launched its new white paper on research called Climate for Research, where we aim especially to strengthen the research in fields that could help us find solutions to the climate challenges in both natural and human sciences. And I'm proud to state that my government has delivered the highest growth in grants to research and development in decades, and that we promise this growth to continue, even if in times of financial and economic crisis, or maybe just it's important in these times. We will, among other plans, present a national action plan on climate research. In this area of commitment, as in many others, social science will play a significant role. In this country, social science is an integral part of policy making. Even though some of the earliest social reports about this country was written by foreigners who, for instance, observed a strange custom that the native Norwegians practiced. It was hunting on a pair of wooden planks, also called skiing. And even if those earlier narrators were foreigners, we certainly get to have some of Norwegian ancestry too, and we are certainly proud of our founding father of Norwegian sociology, Eilert Sundt, who was active in the 1850s and 60s. Several of his studies were commissioned by the Norwegian Parliament. They understood that knowledge could provide the basis for interventions on topics as diverse as poverty, living conditions, food customs, and marriage. Today, it is difficult to think of new reforms being introduced without studies carried out before their implementation, and it is also difficult to think of major reforms which are not followed up by research to map and monitor their effects. But is the relationship between social research and the authorities getting too cozy and too close? Are social scientists being co-opted, even corrupted, by the embrace of the powers that be? Are the critical functions of social scientists being muted? Do social scientists turn their palms upwards for funding in exchange for casting their eyes downwards, rather than challenging the establishment? I am, of course, no unbiased observer. But as an avid reader of newspapers, I can at least report to you that some of my strongest and most vocal critics are indeed social scientists. And I believe this holds true whoever runs the government. One could say that in the Nordic countries there has been a happy, though on occasion slightly tempestuous marriage between social research and policy making. I think I would like to see a happy triangle between empirical studies, theoretical development, and political interventions monitored by reflection and engaged debate. This is also what I wish for this World Social Science Forum, that we engage each other in order to bring about a better understanding of the world. I wish you good luck with the conference.
Thank you very much, Minister Aasland. There are two further institutions in Norway whose generous support have made this forum possible. The first I am referring to is the Research Council of Norway. With us today from the Council is Arvid Hallén, a sociologist by training and Director General of the Council since 2004. Arvid, it is great to have you with us here. Please come forward. The floor is yours.
Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure as head of the Norwegian Research Council and former Council Director for Social Science and Humanities to address you here today. I want to congratulate the International Social Science Council and ISSC's President, Gudmund Hernes, for organizing this grand event, the first World Social Science Forum. The forum's program is an exciting display of the broad and challenging questions mankind face. Equally, it documents the challenges for science and the social responsibility science must live up to. Our common global challenges call for action, and to act in an efficient way, we need new knowledge, new technologies, more insight, and understanding. In other words, we need strong investments in science and technology. Global issues like poverty, health, energy, climate change are moving to the top of our priorities in Norwegian science policy, and this gives meaning only if Norwegian scientists work together with colleagues around the world. And social science and humanities must be part of this effort. Social science research is called upon, and social scientists must work together with other disciplines in interdisciplinary research. Social science has a strong tradition in our country. Norwegian scholars have produced excellent contributions, and our social scientists have also had the ambitions and abilities to make a difference in the practical political world. This is why it is such a pleasure to welcome you to Norway and to Bergen to this World Social Science Forum. And obviously the forum is not for celebration, it is for hard work. There is a lot to do for everyone involved in the science efforts to address our global challenges. And the science itself faces challenges. We need constantly to scrutinize our theories and methods and improve our abilities to work in broader teams. And the funding agencies, like the Research Council of Norway, need to improve their abilities to include social science and humanities in broad programs. The Research Council is, as mentioned, among the financial contributors to this World Forum. We are among the happy funders. We most often are. We are happy because this conference is important We need more international collaboration. We need to further improve our scientific tools, and we continuously need more and better contributions to the science-based action. I join the previous speakers in welcoming you all to Norway. I thank the organizer, and I wish you all participants the best in our common efforts to move science forward. Thank you.
Thanks to you as well, Arvid. The second Norwegian institution that I was referring to and to whom we owe an enormous debt of gratitude is the University of Bergen. I am so pleased to be able to introduce you to the university's rector, Sigmund Grønmo, a professor in sociology and a true friend to the ISSC. Professor Grønmo, you are most welcome.
Thank you. Honorable ministers, excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you to Bergen, to the University of Bergen, and to the World Social Science Forum. When the University of Bergen was asked by the International Social Science Council whether we wanted to co-host the World Social Science Forum, we did not have to be pushed. We jumped. We saw the hosting of the World Social Science Forum in Bergen as an intellectual opportunity, an opportunity to bring together scholars and users of social science from around the globe for intensive and productive dialogue and exchange, an opportunity to pose challenges and to respond to them by critical arguments. We also saw the World Social Science Forum as an occasion to highlight the long and prominent tradition for doing social science in Bergen. A founding father of Norwegian and Nordic social science was Ludvig Holberg, who was born in Bergen in 1684. Indeed, the Holberg International Memorial Prize is awarded annually here at the University of Bergen. But there is another, more recent legacy as well. Social science as a field of study and research at the University of Bergen was developed only from the 1960s, then very much due to Stein Rokkan's pioneering contributions in social science research and institution building. Stein Rokkan had many talents. One of them was as a superb organizer. So in addition to his position as a University of Bergen professor of comparative politics, he had a lifelong affiliation with the Christian Michelsen Institute and was the founder of the Norwegian Social Science Data Services. He was the secretary of the International Sociological Association and the president of the International Political Science Association. He was also one of the founders of the European Consortium for Political Research. Indeed, one could argue that everything Stein Rokkan touched turned into institutions. One of the institutions was the International Social Science Council, where Stein Rokkan was heavily involved, first as a prime mover in the early 1950s, then as a legendary president in the late 1970s. Later today, we will award the Stein Rokkan Prize in his honor. The University of Bergen has had another affiliation with ISSC as well, through Professor Else Øyen, who was a president of ISSC and a scientific director of the ISSC Comparative Research Program on Poverty, CROP, which is headquartered here at the University of Bergen. As I stated in the beginning, when the University of Bergen was offered to co-host the World Social Science Forum, we jumped. And I have given you the reasons. The very exciting presentations and debates that will prove extremely engaging and stimulating and will inspire us long after the Congress is over. the legacy from and the obligation we feel towards those who laid the foundations on which we build. And of course, the opportunity to meet with you, to engage in dialogue with you, to question and to challenge so that we together can move the social sciences, their engagement and interaction with each other, and with the humanities and natural sciences. Thanks and congratulations to the organizing committee chaired by ISSC President Professor Gudmund Hernes and to the local committee chaired by Professor Annelise Fimreit. Welcome to the University of Bergen and best wishes for the World Social Science Forum while you are here.
Thank you, Professor Grunmo, for leading the jump. Ladies and gentlemen, the ISSC was founded in 1952 following a resolution adopted at the 6th UNESCO General Conference in 1951. We continue to enjoy formal relations with and support from UNESCO and have recently signed a new framework agreement which confirms our ongoing and complementary collaboration. It is extremely important for us to have UNESCO with us at this forum, and I am honored to welcome here Pierre Sanet, UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences since 2001. Along with his dedicated staff, Pierre, who holds a doctorate in political science, is a constant source of support to the ISSC. Mr. Sanet, we are grateful for this and for UNESCO's support for this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Pierre Sanet.
Dr. Gudmund Hernes, President of the International Social Science Council, Minister Tora Aasland, Minister of Higher Education and Research of Norway, Dr. Arvid Hallen, Director General of the Research Council of Norway, Dr. Sigmund Gronmo, Rector of the University of Bergen, Dr. Elga Nowotny, Vice President of the European Research Council, honorable ministers, distinguished ladies and fine gentlemen, dear members of the ISSC Executive Committee, I bring you the greetings of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and of its Director General, Koichiro Matsuura, who had indeed responded initially positively to the invitation of Dr. Hernes to speak at this opening ceremony. Unfortunately, the permanent pressures on his agenda and the usual unforeseen circumstances prevented him from joining you. I'm afraid you will have to make do with me. Usually, when social scientists congregate, one problematique is recurrent in the debates: crisis. Crisis of values, crisis in society, crisis of the market, crisis in higher education, crisis in the Middle East. They leave satisfied that they have adequately addressed the issues and provided for appropriate lines of action, but also with the lingering angst that they will be once again unheard. This time, we meet when it is the whole world in a deafening chorus which is drumming crisis, crisis. From Kuala Lumpur to Johannesburg, from Casablanca to Berlin, from Wall Street to Main Street, the worries are accumulating as to whether the leaders of the world will be able to stem the consequences of the fiscal crisis on the existential needs and welfare of the people of the planet. Obviously, For social scientists, it is not good enough to say, "We told you so." The answer must be in the form of a search for an opportunity to advance rapidly a change agenda, to join heads with the forces of change locally, nationally, and globally, and to prove that another world is not only possible, but that it is imperative. Another world where the economy is put at the service of the people. Another world where the rich will not continue to do as they please, while the poor endure what they must. A world where life options are kept open for the future generations. A world ruled by the force of law and not by the law of force. Another world, as the one suggested by these young, new Norwegians who opened this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, it just happened that this year UNESCO will be organizing 2 other world conferences in addition to our participation in the World Social Science Forum here in Bergen. The World Conference on Science in Budapest, 3rd edition. The World Conference on Higher Education in July in Paris. The World Human Rights Forum in Nantes every 2 years. These, of course, will not be the only world conferences organized this year, nor should they invalidate the title of your conference, One Planet, Worlds Apart. Working in a multilateral organization, I can testify to the growing tensions in the management of the world between the West and the rest. The negotiations over Durban II are just the last visible testimony of the shaking of an old world order that is summoned to give way to a new world that is struggling to emerge. My sense is that we are living in a time of epochal change. The whole world now is free from foreign occupation, with a few exceptions. New powerful economies are asserting themselves in the South. The idea of a human right entitlement has permeated the consciousness of societies and communities the world over, thanks to the spectacular advances in education and the courageous work of the human rights defenders. Clearly, this is not the end of history. It is a moment where all the ingredients are reunited to usher in an epochal transformation. The question is, can it be achieved without major conflagrations? Which brings in the role of the United Nations organizations, established after a devastating conflagration, with the objective of preserving peace by ending injustice. Will governments be wise enough to use these mechanisms, bolster them in these times of crisis, to allow them to fulfill these missions? The jury is still out. For the time being, only the IMF has been given that boost due to the perception that if you fix world finance, the rest will follow. The same logic that presided over the establishment of the WTO: fix world trade and the rest will follow. Allow me to express deep doubts. UNESCO, for its part, is calling on government to invest out of the crisis through education and intellectual cooperation, through adherence to ethical standards and respect for cultural diversity, through reinforced dialogue and protection of all human rights, including social, economic, and cultural rights, through intellectual solidarity and a mobilization to abolish the poverty that debilitates billions of our planet's compatriots. Dear Professor Harness, dear Dr. Hackman, this forum is, to say the least, timely, and UNESCO is indeed privileged to be joining you, especially as it takes place in a city that has been listed on UNESCO's World Cultural Heritage Site since 1979. The beautiful surroundings of the city with deep fjords is providing the perfect setting for the intellectual exchanges, not to mention the stubborn rain, which will keep all of us, after all, indoors for the rest of the 3 days. Let me end by thanking the ISSC, its new leadership, its vision, and thank also the government of Norway for its support to international social sciences and its steady effort to equip UNESCO with the resolve to promote the sciences, including social sciences, internationally. I thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sané. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many other scientific organizations, research councils, funding agencies, foundations, and individual universities that we are very proud to count as sponsors and partners in this forum. There are unfortunately too many to have up here on stage with us. They are, however, listed in your programs and specified per those sessions or events that they have supported. I'm extremely pleased to see many of these institutions represented here and want them to know that we are grateful for their invaluable support. Now, finally, allow me to introduce you to Professor Helga Nowotny. Helga is Vice President of the European Research Council. She is Chair of the Scientific Advisory Board of the University of Vienna and Professor Emeritus of Social Studies of Science at ETH Zurich. Helga, who has also chaired from 2001 to 2005 the European Research Advisory Board of the European Commission, has been invited to address us today on questions about the ability of the social sciences to deliver on their promises, to provide answers to the unprecedented challenges facing societies today. The title of Helga's presentation is Out of Science, Out of Sync. Helga, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, let me just say I'm very happy to be here, back in Bergen. I'm also a member of the Holberg Prize Committee, so I will be back in June and in November. But above all, to share with you thoughts to what I see indeed as a very challenging topic. And I want to thank Gudmund Hernes for suggesting to me to address this topic. In the 20 minutes that have been allotted to me, I will group my remarks in 5 answers that I try to give to the challenge behind my topic, answers that are tentative, that are debatable, but nevertheless should point one way forward. Now, moving out of science, moving out of sync, can be understood in several ways. The first way in which it can be understood is indeed, once we move out of the institution of science with its presumed certainty of knowledge, we are moving into a world of politics, of economics, real in the sense of messy. And behind this moving out of science, moving into this messy world, of course, is an image of science as an institution, modern science, as it was institutionalized in the 17th century, and where it needed to be protected. And the claim at that time was that scientific knowledge had to need a space of autonomy, relative autonomy, but a space of autonomy where neither religious nor political authorities could interfere. Now, this is the basis on which modern science was founded, and over the centuries, of course, we have seen that this relative space of autonomy has to be contextualized. It is never a complete autonomy. And in the last couple of decades in particular, we have seen that society addresses science and expects from science a new form of accountability. and that democratization as a large process does not halt in front of science. So indeed, there is a gap, there is something that one can call out of sync. There are different rationalities. It's not the rational versus the irrational, but different kinds of rationalities. There are different kinds of accountabilities that reign in science, between science and society, and in the political world, in the sense of being accountable to an electorate, our political leaders. There are different time perspectives. Research has a long time perspective. The political world, as we all know, a very short one. And above all, there are different expectations. Expectations from the world of policy that scientific knowledge should come up with solutions, while in research, what counts is you come up, if you have solved something, with another set of fascinating new questions that lead you into the territory of what is still unknown. So this is part of the way how science as an institution is embedded in wider society. And part of this we have discussed before. We have discussed in the 70s that we should have more realistic expectations of the policy process under the label of incrementalism. And we have also dissected and deconstructed how policy advice functions. So what is new now? And this is my first attempt of an answer. I think indeed what is new now is that we see an increasing number of phenomena that pertain to both worlds, that have one part that comes from the natural world, one part that belongs to the social order. They are co-produced, as we call it in social studies of science. If you take the phenomenon of climate change, climate is a natural phenomenon, but it is caused, or at least co-caused, by human action and anthropogenic ways that have created climate change in the way that now hits back and that makes and remakes society on different scales and in different kinds. Or if you take the example of the stupendous transformations and advances in the life sciences, where biologists are able to come up with entirely new entities that are likely to change the way we identify ourselves, or the communities, genetic communities, to which we now discover we belong, which are overlapping with social communities, but nevertheless of a different kind. Well, the advances of biology are part of what scientists do. This is nothing that is completely set apart, but it is related to the way how the social order, in this sense, the scientific order works. Or if you take up another examples, the virus that preoccupied us, viruses have existed before humans existed. And nevertheless, if it were not 500,000 people using airplanes every day, we would not care about this virus because we would all sit in relatively isolated communities and this would not become a problem. So you see, and this is the way how out of science, out of sync, can be answered. What is new is that we have a co-production of phenomena that pertain both to the natural order, to the social order, that develop with different speeds, that develop in a non-linear way. Now there's a second sense in which my theme can be interpreted. And this would be a storyline that goes somewhat like the following. We run out, or the question, are we running out of scientific knowledge? Do we have all the knowledge that we need in order to be able to address the problems that we face? Do we need to reorganize our knowledge production? Is there something like knowledge that you can store somewhere on the shelf? Or to take an expression that comes from industrial production, is there just-in-time production of knowledge? Again, I would say we have been there before, and some of this has the ring of the familiar, the Enlightenment, of course, but also the modernization through technocratic elites as it happened in Europe in the 60s and 70s. We believed in planning, we believed in the ability of social science in particular to make predictions, cautious ones, but nevertheless, and we believed that there is something that we have to offer as if it were taking from the shelf. The latest version of this takes the form of evidence-based policy without very often asking what kind of evidence, for whom and whose evidence is it that we are offering here. So again, what is different this time? And my answer is that we have to admit and to confront that indeed there is a growing complexity, and out of sync means to pose the question whether the knowledge that is available is able to be fitted into contexts that cannot be foreseen, whether there are different speeds that no one can control. Let me again revert to climate change. Climate dynamics is one way in which the problem sort of takes on its own speed. But are the measures that we propose, mitigation, adaptation, other kinds of measures, are they fast enough in order to be able to cope? The same question pertains to the economic stimulus packages and other measures that are now everywhere offered and acted upon through governments. It will take time until they become effective. And so again, we have a gap here, out of sync in terms of speed of action, of reaction, even if we had the knowledge. And this is all the more made more complex through the global world and its complexities with all the institutions. So my second answer is that yes, we have been there before, but nevertheless, the situation is different in terms of speed and scale, of time and space, and we should admit that there are uncertainties, that there are passions and interests, to reuse a phrase by Albert Hirschman, that we are still in the process of disentangling, and that there is a kind of co-evolution going on. And yet, we want to be prepared. We need to be prepared. So what is the state of the relevant social science knowledge today? What is its potential, its capability, its willingness to address policy questions? First of all, let me state something that is very often forgotten, and that pertains to scientific consensus. And by this I mean both the consensus of the natural scientists and of the social scientists. And I see the consensus is subject in both cases to two trends that coexist. On the one hand, scientific consensus is always something very fragile. You can poke a hole easily if you use a disciplinary knife, and it will split. It will become fragile and fragmented. At the same time, scientific consensus is tremendously robust. And it is robust if the scientific community is able to speak with one voice in public, and it is robust because the scientific community knows it has mechanisms of criticisms, of generating knowledge that will proceed and be able to certify knowledge. The knowledge we have is also heterogeneous, and it keeps evolving. We as social scientists, for the first time, have new kinds of data that are being produced by the technologies that are around us, and some of us are using these data to do social network analysis that tell us in a different way something that we did not know or could not verify. with other tools. And by the way, social network analysis started with sociology before it was taken over by other disciplines. There are questions being asked, very legitimate questions. What is empirical for the social sciences if we admit, as I think we have to, a methodological pluralism? And there are the voices, sometimes we call it the voices of the South, but it's in reality the vast majority of humankind on this planet, because Europe and the US are but a minority in terms of population. The voices of the non-Europe and non-US that need to be brought in and taken into account. So we have here a creative, dynamic mess. We have a heterogeneity, and the question to ask, is it sufficiently attuned to questions like, does the context matter? Can we take the context into account? Where history matters, do we take history into account? Is it sufficiently open for what I call loose coupling, to be linked to other disciplinary perspectives, or to be linked to perspectives like that of a policy world that are not part of the discipline? And is it sufficiently self-reflexive and potent enough to make institutions more self-reflexive in order to understand, for example, how problems are framed? Problems do not arise naturally. Problems are framed in ways that one needs to understand. So my third answer is, do not look for relevant social science knowledge as predefined, but something that emerges context-specific ways that needs to be loosely coupled and self-reflexive. Now the next step is to move, and this is a suggestion, to move from what we used to call relevant knowledge to what I would like to call socially robust knowledge. This is a term that I have developed together with my colleagues in the context of the so-called Mode 2 production of knowledge, where we were arguing that for natural science knowledge, it is not enough to accept by society if this knowledge is reliable. It has to become socially robust. And this is even more true for social scientific knowledge. It has to be tested in the real world, and this is done by integrating the experience of people, of institutions, of policymakers, and the meanings that people, institutions, and policymakers give to their experience. The financial crisis, this is the only time I use the word crisis, the financial and economic crisis in our hands makes it clear that it matters what people believe. Did they actually think that the models that were used by the so-called quants on the financial markets are predictive truth machines or mere heuristics? Did people believe every economic theory, or did they doubt it? So the kind of questions to be raised and have to include beliefs and meanings. So my fourth answer is, if we move from relevant knowledge to socially robust knowledge, this means a move based on multiple perspectives, including alternative futures, integrating disciplinary knowledge coming from different disciplines, and outside lay knowledge as well as expert knowledge, but always including experiences and meanings. Now, I want to end with a very brief outlook, future directions, and the willingness and capability of social sciences to engage with policy making, because I think this is the crucial question that we need to address. And here I have three rather simple messages. My first message is, that we should not let ourselves continue to be overwhelmed by the public rhetoric of innovation, meaning only scientific and technological innovation. Social innovations are just as important as scientific and technological innovations. First of all, because the more scientific and technological innovations we have, the more social knowledge is needed to embed them in society. But secondly also, because this is something that we should be good at. We should be able to come up with social innovations in terms of designing new institutions. We need new institutions, of coming up with new procedures for conflict resolution, for various kinds of distributional problems that we have at our hand, and to create new public spaces in which such institutions can flourish. My second message is to take the new 21st parameters into account, globality with its multiple time and space scales, which need to be thought simultaneously. The 19th century was the one that saw the institutionalization of the social sciences in the shadow of the then emerging nation states, with national identities being constructed, social movements like the famous social question being turned into an academic discipline, and trying to answer how is social order possible within the frame of a nation state. And at the beginning of the 21st century, we have to rethink what this means in a global world. My third message takes up what I said before, building upon experience and meanings of individuals and institutions, and how they make sense of all the perturbations they experience. The perturbations, the transformations may be economic, they may come from the impact of the life sciences or other new technologies, they may be cultural in terms of migration, and so on. And to create experimental spaces with institutions that accompany, guide, regulate, redistribute the kind of meanings and experience that people have. So my fifth and last answer is a but. But if we are going in that direction, do not expect solutions. Do not expect ready-made knowledge that can be taken from the shelf, but rather look out for joint collaboration, for multiple problem spaces that need to be defined, created, negotiated together with policymakers, with those who are interested in our knowledge. And these multiple problem spaces, if they are indeed collaborative problem spaces, they are constantly changing, they are reconfigured, they will impact on the framing and what will come out of it. Perhaps my vision of forming this joint engagement with policymakers comes closest to what John Dewey a long time ago said about the work of reconstruction, and I quote John Dewey: "Reconstruction can be nothing less than the work of developing, of forming, of producing, in the literal sense of that word, the intellectual instrumentalities which will progressively direct inquiry into the deeply and inclusively human, that is to say, moral, facts of the present scene and situation." Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me again in thanking Helga, but also all of the other speakers for being with us today, for the opening of the forum, and for their stimulating, thought-provoking contributions to this opening. We have gone over time, but we can handle this, and you will be rewarded now with a nice cup of coffee and a snack, but we do ask that we reduce the coffee break to a quarter of an hour, and we look forward to seeing you back here at 3:45 for the plenary session by Amartya Sen. It only remains for me now to thank you for coming to Bergen to be with us and to wish you intense, innovative, inspiring discussions, good networking, and a pleasant stay in Bergen.